Lambremont Webre. Patrice Sheridan speaking, and during this January 19th live broadcast, our producer Bill may be joining us. Our guest websites are exopolitics.com and exouniversity.org. Here are some of his bio details per exopolitics.blogs.com. Alfred Lambremont Webre is a futurist whose book, Exopolitics, founded the science of intelligent civilizations in the multiverse and expresses a positive timeline for Earth. Alfred is chairman of the Mars Anomaly Research Society, or MARS, with website www.projectmars.net, educating about life on Mars. A graduate of Yale University, Yale Law School, and a Fulbright scholar, Alfred has taught economics at Yale University and constitutional law at the University of Texas. Alfred was general counsel to the New York City Environmental Protection Administration, a futurist at Stanford Research Institute, where he directed the proposed 1977 Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Study, and is a judge on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal. Alfred is director and faculty member of Exo University, a nonprofit educational entity for continuing online education in exosciences, sci-sciences, and exopolitics. On Alfred's books, the Omniverse Quintology consists of the following books by Alfred Lambremont Webre: Journey, My Journey Landing Heaven on Earth book, synthesizing key elements of a vision for a positive Earth. Exopolitics, Politics, Government, and Law in the Universe, a book that founded the modern science of exopolitics. The Omniverse, a book that discovered and documented the omniverse and the dimensional ecology of the omniverse. Alfred's book, The Dimensional Ecology of the Omniverse, integrates empirical data from intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations and from the intelligent civilizations of souls in the interlife, and demonstrates a new hypothesis of a functioning ecology of intelligence in the dimensions in the omniverse. The Age of Cataclysm, Alfred Lambremont Webre and Philip H. Liss, What an Earth Changes Hard Landing Would Have Looked Like, and the Levesque cases, exposing the shadow world government and its tentacles. Welcome to the show, Alfred. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us this evening.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm very glad that you asked me to be here, and I'm very glad to be here.
Indeed, the honor is ours, Alfred. Now, Alfred, and pardon my interrupting.
Sure.
First, to begin this interview, we will be speaking on your Omniverse trilogy, the books Journey, Exopolitics, and the Omniverse, and two aspects in the Omniverse trilogy. The first aspect is your 1973 ET abduction, which you believe was coordinated with the ET abductions in 1975 and a prominent political figure in 1969. This material was discussed in your first book, Journey, correct?
Yes. Well, it was discussed in my most recent book, Journey, which was published in 2017. And what I've done is I've kind of done things backwards in a certain sense, and that's why I'm now coming out in 2018 to really present what the real story has been. And as many of you know, in the year 2000, I published the book Exopolitics, which turned ufology on its ear and introduced the science of exopolitics to the world. And what the science of exopolitics is, it's sort of like taking the science of anthropology, which studies the different races of humans on the planet Earth, and it applies them to the universe and to the multiverse at large, and says these are our universe and our multiverse is inhabited and it's highly organized, and this is how one should approach the study of intelligent civilizations in the multiverse, not as ufology was approaching it, which is kind of a nuts and bolts approach, and that's what occurred with my book Exopolitics, that was published in the year 2000. But then I began to unlayer all of the different layers of my books, kind of as a disclosure of the quantum access. And the next layer that was just disclosed was the quantum access, and that is that the U.S. government and other powers, including the Vatican, have been accessing the quantum, or in other words, the dimension of time, because we're in a time-space hologram. The universe is actually a time-space hologram. And ever since the 1980s, the 1960s, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and DARPA, as subcontractees initially of the Vatican, and then on their own initiative had been exploring the time-space hologram through time travel, and initially through the chronovisors, which were like, in its most rudimentary form, like a TV set that a two-dimensional TV screen that you can dial up and down any timeline, past, present, or future, and dial up an event. So long as you know the date and time of it, and just dial up the address of that event in the time-space hologram, because every event has an address or a location in time and space, A, B, C, D. So chronovisors were invented by the Vatican, subcontracted to the Department of Defense, and then developed there under defense contracts. And as it turns out, my book, Exopolitics, was time traveled by the U.S. DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and by the CIA from 2005, when it was first published, back to 1971, when it was brought inside Project Pegasus, the name for the top secret time travel project of DARPA, and shown there to the whistleblower who would make all of this public, a U.S. chrononaut, Andrew D. Bishago, who was doing time travel for the U.S. government at that time, and he was shown my book back in 1971. Well, in 1971, I was general counsel to the Environmental Protection Administration of the city of New York. And at that time, one of my duties was to give talks to the public on the protection of the environment. And one of the talks that I gave was to a group that came and asked me to speak to them on the environment. Only they weren't a group. They were really the Time Travel Project, about 50 or so officers, agents, and employees of the DARPA CIA Time Travel Project, who, under the pretenses of my giving them a talk on the protection of the environment, invited me to what must have been an hour or an hour and a half's drive south of New York. We went up to a nondescript office building on the second floor there, and there were about 50 or so men in suits and in shirts and ties, kind of typical bureaucrats. And they were there because they had been briefed and had seen my book, which had been brought back from the future, from 2005, when it had been published, and most probably had also been made privy to what I call time travel surveillance of me. And that is that the U.S. government possessed time travel technology which can hack into anybody's reality and actually do real-time time travel surveillance on them. And so they may or may not have been doing time travel surveillance of me in 2005 as I was researching or writing the book, or as I was speaking here on this show today, sharing these facts as to the true history of how exopolitics developed and how this kind of knowledge was brought to planet Earth. And so that was yet another kind of rollout of this information, because after the publication of my book Exopolitics in 2005, what I did was I invited Andrew Bishago to go public, and because I was a broadcaster, I interviewed him, and he began to go public and to make all of these facts known. I also founded, as you just stated, Exo University, where Andrew and some of his colleagues, Bernard Mendez and William Brett Stillings, who had done some of the time traveling and some of the teleportation with him in these secret quantum access projects, to go public as well, so that these facts were known. And that's how I dedicated my time then to really establish some of this evidence and to make it more widely known. And we also made other discoveries. For example, at this time, Andrew Basiago and William Stillings came forward that at the College of the Siskiyous in California, they had attended a secret Life on Mars training in the summer of 1980. The College of the Siskiyous being in California near Mount Shasta. And there they had attended a training along with a young Barry Soetoro, who grew up to be Barack Obama. He changed his name in 1982 at a court hearing here in Skakumchick, British Columbia, where he changed his name to Barack Obama because a Kenyan civil servant had agreed to kind of what they call a CIA cover story, whereby he would agree to act as the putative father of Barry Soetoro, even though he wasn't a biological father. He would agree to that. Then Barry Soetoro changed his name to Barack Obama, and sure enough, shortly thereafter, the real Barack Obama, the civil servant, was killed in a CIA arranged automobile accident in Kenya. So there's all this kind of cloak and dagger, and this is generally how the information about the Earth being in a highly populated and highly organized universe has been leaked in this planet, and the reason why is because of the highly troubled exopolitical history of this planet. And if all extraterrestrials were good, as people like Dr. Stephen Greer, whom I just heard in a 2-hour interview with another colleague of mine, Dr. Carol Rosin, maintaining that all extraterrestrials were good, well, then we wouldn't have this quarantined planet, Earth, which has been quarantined for, I would say, at least 50,000 years because of various wars that have taken place here, including nuclear wars, which destroyed the planet Tiamat, which is now an asteroid belt, which denuded Mars, which was a verdant planet, which there's good evidence that Mars was denuded because of nuclear warfare between various extraterrestrial civilizations. So it's absurd to say that all extraterrestrial civilizations are good. And, so that I feel that it's my duty, and as the founder of Exopolitics, to serve as kind of a truth squad. And among the truths that I've been gathering and publishing over the last 40 plus years, since 1973, since we went public with this information, is that in the summer of 1980, there was a series of CIA seminars held in the College of the Siskiyous in California. Now, part of them were a Mars training course, but the other part were a training course by the CIA for, quote, future leaders, or as I call them, moles, CIA moles, in the exopolitics movement, who would come in and promote memes and thought forms that aren't correct. And one of the participants in the seminars in the College of the Siskiyous in the 1980s, who was there being trained by the CIA to be, quote, part of the disclosure movement, end of quote, in the late 90s was one Dr. Stephen Greer. Now, and he was identified back then both by Andrew D. Bishago and William Brett Stillings. I spoke to William Brett Stillings about a month and a half ago. He's now working for a defense contractor in Southern California, working for on a specific aspect of the secret space program. And Andrew D. Bishago is currently working, is currently in Vancouver, Washington, and is currently based there. And these are the two eyewitnesses to Stephen Greer being there. And Stephen Greer was openly known as Steve the CIA guy, Steve the CIA gay guy, because he was known as gay back then, and it's an open secret that he is gay, and there's nothing wrong with being openly gay. 3 of my brothers are openly gay, and you know they're my 3 youngest brothers, and they're part of that, of the generation of men who decided that they wanted to leave their lives as openly gay people, and which Steve was back in the 1980s. And however, Stephen Greer will not admit that he was trained by the CIA to be a CIA mole in the disclosure movement, promoting a meme that all extraterrestrials are good, which is absurd. I mean, how can you come into a solar system which is decimated, which is one of the most catastrophically targeted solar systems in the galaxy, where you've got the asteroid belt, which was a major planet, Tiamat, which was like an Earth that was larger, that was totally blown out in a solar system, in a galactic war, where Mars was destroyed. We're the only kind of remaining planet at the 3D level is Earth. I mean, that is one of the most exopolitically ignorant things to say, or one of the most exopolitically diabolical things to say if you're saying that on behalf of the CIA, or because of CIA brainwashing, or because of the brainwashing of some other race like the Greys. And so that's something that I want to state very, very strongly and very, very plainly here. And people should understand historically that I'm a disclosure project witness. Dr. Greer likes to think of himself as the sole architect of the disclosure project that occurred on May 9th 2001 at the National Press Club. However, that was staged by many, many people. Steve Bassett got the room. Myself, Cal Rosin, and other people really organized it. I was the director I coordinated all of the international press. I was the congressional coordinator for it. I helped liaise with the domestic press. It was the most widely covered event up until that point. And when the press release went out, and I've got copies of it, it was under two names, Dr. Stephen Greer and Alfred Lambremont Webre, J.D., M.Ed. And the reason for that is that I had been the director of the Jimmy Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Project. And
Indeed.
and the Disclosure Project was subsequently completely appropriated by Dr. Stephen Greer, who is a CIA mole in the disclosure movement. The reason why I'm speaking out is that in 1973, when I first became involved in this, if you take it to the end of 1972, at that point, toward the end of 1972, I really had become interested in the multi-dimensional area and was reading books like Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder. I had no idea when DARPA and CIA time travel secret unit invited me to speak to them that that's who they were. I thought that they were just this private organization who they claimed to be, asked me to speak to them as a representative of the city of New York. Not that they were looking at me because they had brought my book back from 2005 and they wanted to see what I really looked like in 1971 because they had been doing time travel surveillance on my book from 2005 and perhaps on me. And so at the beginning of 1973, I met a professor of experimental psychology at Rutgers University, Dr. Philip Liss, who also was an expert on extraterrestrial issues and on parapsychology. And we formed an intellectual partnership. His wife was a fellow psychologist, along with my cousin Ann Weber, at the Karen Horney Institute in New York City. And so we kind of joined forces in January of 1973 because at that point, Mayor John Lindsay, who was the head of the government where I was the general counsel of the EPA, had decided that he wanted to run for president. So he was leaving his job, and Jerome Kretschmer, who was the EPA director, decided he wanted to run for mayor of New York. So everybody was getting into politics, just as I was moving away from politics and getting into the multidimensional world by reading about all of these phenomena. And so what occurred to me then at the beginning of February of 1973, which I describe at length in my book, My Journey Landing Heaven on Earth. It's a book which I published in 2017.
You know what I find fascinating now, I believe in this book, is that the first instance of your use of the term adduction rather than abduction. Adduction makes me think of the Latin verb adducere, to take to or to take towards. And also, Alfred, you were appointed very soon thereafter in 1977 to direct the Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communications Study. Do you think there is a connection with these abductions and that initiative?
Yes, I do. And the connection is as follows, and it's totally documented, and we have presented it at the Yelm International UFO Festival, along with Andy Bashago. What occurred is that President Jimmy Carter and myself and Andy Bashago were all abducted by the same group of extraterrestrials or interdimensionals. And the word abduction, and this really in the articles that we use to describe this abduction, these are terms that come out of the work of Mary Rodwell and a whole number of other scholars that are moving away from the word abduction to the word adduction. Because what happens to individuals that are subject to adduction is that they're not taken away from Earth, they're taken toward the stars. And one becomes much more exo-conscious, and you take on much more of the consciousness of the civilization that is introducing you to their perspective. And so it really should be called an adduction rather than an abduction. And so I go to lengths to explain that at the beginning of the PowerPoint and the presentation of the 1973 adduction of myself. What it is that in 1969, as Jimmy Carter was about to go into the Leary, Georgia Lions Club with 10 or so of his companions, a UFO appeared, he said, as bright as, brighter than the moon. And it was a missing time experience for him, and he was taken aboard a craft. And there's a lot of deep analysis that we do in all of the articles here. And he entered into training programs with the extraterrestrials that had to do with preparations for his campaign for the presidency, and with the coordination of my being director of his extraterrestrial communication project. Because, as you know, President Dwight Eisenhower in 1954 had signed the Grenada Treaty, in which he had allied the United States and the Western powers with the Draco reptilians, the Orion Greys, and the Anunnaki reptilians.
I remember. Now, Bill, please stand by. Someone's at my front door. Please tell us about the Grenada Treaty. I will be right there, and I'm hearing you.
Yeah, the 1954 Grenada Treaty is a treaty that the United States, it's a secret treaty that, by the way, we now have a proposal before the current U.S. president to abrogate the 1954 Grenada Treaty, and that is to pull out of it. And what the Grenada Treaty has done is that treaty gave secret permission to the Draco reptilians, the Orion Greys, and the Anunnaki reptilians to start a program of abduction, of arms exchange and technology exchange, and in essence of governmental and social and mind control takeover of humanity. And ever since that point, we now have, in essence, all of the U.S. government and law enforcement has gone into stand down on the abduction of children by the worldwide pedocriminal rings that are abducting tens of thousands and amounted to millions of children and adults for the galactic pedocriminal trade and for the trade in human trafficking throughout the galaxy, body parts, children, food, and slave labor, and also the pedocriminal trade on the planet that traces itself back to the 1954 Grenada Treaty and the Tau 9 Treaty that was updated by George H.W. Bush. And that all goes back to that treaty. And so in the 1969 abduction, Jimmy Carter, in this in his missing time abduction, was being prepared for his mission to begin to liberate the planet and humanity from this imprisonment under the Draco reptilians. And then in 1973, in February of 1973, I describe in my book, My Journey Landing Heaven on Earth, my part of the abduction, and then again in my presentation at Yale, which is online as well, I describe it. Andy Bashago comes on and describes his 1975 abduction, where the ET showed him me being abducted, so that he would be a witness, a physical witness of me being abducted in 1973. So it's not just me standing up there and saying it. This is what happened. And what happened to me in my missing time experience, and this is very much like and in the same spirit as the Los Angeles Times editor, a journalist, Philip Kraft, who was abducted. We would go in and during that time, I was being prepared to assist in the election, the successful election of Jimmy Carter in 1976 as president. And then also, we're coordinating so that once he was elected, I would become director of the 1977 Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Project. And so because of these abductions of Jimmy Carter in 1969, myself in 1973, and Andy Basiago in 1975, you have me, who was a lawyer who really did, a government lawyer who didn't know anything really about extraterrestrials until January of 1973. I went from that on the ground running until just 3 years later, 3 years later, I was having direct emissaries sent to me by President-elect Jimmy Carter, where we met in the Carlisle Hotel in New York. Jimmy Carter sent a direct emissary to me. And then I, became the Carter White House director of the Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Study until all-out war was declared. And the day after I got the formal approval in October of 1977, where I was at the White House, and I got the formal approval for the 1977 Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Study, and then went on over to the White House to a meeting with the Assistant Secretary of Defense at the inner ring of the Pentagon. At that point, there was a counterattack against me with electromagnetic weapons, and I was attacked by men in black, starting at the Pentagon and then continuing at Washington National Airport, where I was attacked by men in black at the airport. I described the scene completely in my book. And then I was continuing down to New Orleans, where I was going to meet with the district attorney. I was scheduled to meet with the then district attorney of New Orleans, who was carrying out an investigation of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, because at that point, Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez had invited me toward the end of 1976 to come down to Washington, D.C., and it was with Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez and the Congressional Black Caucus that we got the committee, the Select Committee on Assassination started to investigate the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King started, because John F. Kennedy had been assassinated because he wanted to open up the whole issue of extraterrestrials. And he was against the Draco Reptilian, Orion Gray, and Anunnaki reptilian imprisonment of this planet, and that's why he was assassinated. And Jimmy Carter knew very much of my role with Henry B. Gonzalez, and after he won the presidency, he sent a personal emissary who was a senior partner at a major law firm in Atlanta, whose son I had gone to prep school with in New York, so I knew him very well. I mean, whose son was affiliated with that law firm. His father was one of the partners in that law firm, so I knew all of the connections there. They were kind of from the Atlanta, Georgia Democratic, liberal Democratic side of things. And I met with him in New York, and he said that President Carter wants to be very close to the John F. Kennedy assassination investigation. So thereby, we're working both through the House Select Committee on Assassinations on Capitol Hill, and I was working also with Jimmy Carter as director, putative director of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. As the I had gotten the provisional approval on the 1977 Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Project. And it was when the Men in Black counterattacked against me. And when I arrived back at Stanford Research Institute, I was called into a meeting with high administration at SRI, and the liaison from SRI and the Pentagon. And the Pentagon liaison said, if this project goes forward, we're going to cancel all of our contracts with SRI, which SRI's budget was about $100 million, and their contracts with the Pentagon were probably about $25 million a year. So that was the end of that, of the Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Project right there. And that's how that was suppressed. However, that left out on the table, which I wanted to say because I just heard Dr. Stephen Greer's address today, the fact that the CIA has thoroughly infiltrated the exopolitics movement and the black budget agencies like the Office of Naval Intelligence and the CIA have thoroughly infiltrated the exopolitics and ufology movement with their agents, who are promoting cockamamie theories like all of the extraterrestrials are good, which is absurd. This solar system has been the locus of major wars, of conflicts to wipe out the entire solar system, wipe out planets, wipe out entire populations, which are deep battles of opposing forces. And so what I have done in the Omniverse trilogy is, with these 3 books, is really to provide what I call a magic triangle. And the magic triangle is that of the Omniverse. The 3 cosmological entities through which humanity understands its place in the cosmos. The universe, the multiverse, and the omniverse. The universe is an organic singularity of time, energy, space, and matter that the Sumerian astronomers first discovered back in 3500 to 3200 BC in the present kind of modern iteration of time. This planet has been an arena for many, many incarnations and many, many civilizations. The multiverse is can be defined as the collection of all of the universes that exist. And the multiverse was discovered in 1895 by the American scientist and psychologist William James. And to give you a concept of the number of multiverses, the number of universes in the multiverse, two Stanford psychologists have estimated that the number of universes in the multiverse is 10 to the 7th to the 7th. And that number is so large, they call it humongous. That number is so large that if we attempted to write it down in 12-point type, that number alone would be more than 260 million miles long. That's how many universes there are in the multiverse. Now, what the Omniverse is...
Thank you. I'm dying to hear the Omniverse definition. We have about 7 minutes left.
Yeah.
Please give us a great definition on the Omniverse as you'll be doing, and then I want to talk about Omniversity.
Yeah. The Omniverse, which was discovered in 2014 independently by two scientists in two independent books written in different parts of the world, Bertolacci and Weber. Two independent scientists discovered the Omniverse. And this often happens in science, that two people independently discover the Omniverse. And what the Omniverse is, and it's not a matter of faith, the Omniverse equation is Omniverse equals multiverse, i.e. all the universes of the multiverse plus the spiritual dimensions. And what the spiritual dimensions are the intelligent civilizations of souls in the afterlife plus the spiritual entities plus source. And that is not a matter of faith, that is a matter of science. And we now have the science of the Omniverse. We have laboratory protocols and replicable results about what the human soul is, about what spiritual entities are, about what source is, and we deal with them in the same way that we deal with other scientific knowledge according to the scientific method. And this is all set out in my book, The Omniverse, that was started by a request from Oxford University to me to write a book on extraterrestrials and the law. And I had to do that according to science. And so what we're doing now with Omniversity, which will launch later in the spring of 2018, is to launch a online virtual learning environment for everyone who wants to engage in it of this new knowledge, because we discovered in our experience with Exo University, which was to bring exosciences, sci-sciences, and exobiology to, which are disciplines that are being gatekept out of the university system, because you either have to become a spy or a contactee to really learn all of these new sciences. You have to work for a black budget corporation or the ETs in order to get in on these sciences. So now we are opening up Omniversity, which will be online later in 2018, which will be offering classes, courses, webinars in all of the multi-dimensional areas. So that is, kind of a sum and substance of how a government official became involved with the ETs, helped Jimmy Carter become president, went up there and started the Jimmy Carter White House ET project, got involved in bringing exopolitics and the Omniverse to humanity, and is blowing the whistle on the infiltration of all these false ideas in exopolitics and ufology itself. So thanks a lot, then. And really, I would like to urge people, if they really want to catch up on what's going on, we now have a new offering on the Omniverse trilogy, and you can find it at exopolitics.com or universebooks.com.
Excellent. Alfred, thank you for joining us tonight for a fascinating program. Your comments and your research and work definitely so intrigue. Again, Alfred Lambremont Webre's websites are exopolitics.com and exouniversity.org. Listeners, we always appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today with our featured guest, Alfred Lambremont Webre. Stay tuned for superb programs on your contact for all